On that critical morning, a deep sense of dread awakened Father Tony. The air within the parish was notably grim, as if tension had enveloped everyone there. After preparing for the day, he left his bedroom to find a group of church members and security staff waiting with anxious anticipation. The somber looks on their faces confirmed his deepest apprehensions. It had happened once more. The church had been suffering from a string of burglaries over recent months, executed under the veil of darkness. Unprincipled intruders had been repeatedly targeting the holy premises, pilfering items of value such as musical instruments and golden chalices, as well as repeatedly stealing the donations stored in the sacristy. Despite efforts to outwit the burglars through measures like lock replacements and reorganization of the church's layout, the offenders kept slipping through, almost mocking the community with their cunning escapes. The most recent burglary was the most tumultuous yet. The havoc wrought was disheartening, with items once neatly arranged now strewn about, curtains and garments forcefully torn down, and a level of chaos surpassing all prior incidents. A grim discovery was made by the church members when they realized that the funds recently collected to replace the stolen items, secretly stashed in a ceiling box thought safe from theft, were gone. The shock of the breach was palpable among everyone. Reflecting on the severity of these events, Father Tony regretted ignoring suggestions from parishioners to keep the funds in his own room. Nonetheless, he was determined to bring back peace and safety to his congregation. Resolute in the face of the upheaval caused by the thieves, he committed to introducing stringent new security protocols, confident that these measures would not only prevent future violations, but also aid in capturing the culprits. Father Tony, who had served his community faithfully for over 20 years, was thrust into an extraordinary dilemma. Renowned for his significant contributions to local infrastructure, healthcare, and education, he was particularly esteemed for establishing a free water system that ensured the well-being of his community. Every home had access to clean water. His profound dedication to the local community had won him a cherished spot in the hearts of the residents, who embraced him as family and honored him as if he were royalty during his visits. Tony lived in a community where crime was virtually unknown, and kindness and decency were commonplace. He had never felt compelled to doubt the integrity of his neighbors. However, recent events had prompted him to take measures he had never before contemplated. On this particular day, as he settled into his ergonomic office chair and began to analyze the CCTV footage from cameras he had discreetly installed out of necessity rather than mistrust, his heart dropped. To his astonishment, he saw Father Rubio, his junior priest, on the screen. Tony's hands shot to his mouth in shock, a clear moment of disbelief. Father Rubio had arrived at the church during a busy period, and his presence had been a godsend for Tony, who often struggled to manage his responsibilities alone. The diocese had periodically sent junior priests like Father Rubio and Sister Helen to help, which had been crucial in keeping the church operations running smoothly and giving Tony some much-needed downtime. The day Father Rubio was expected to arrive, he inexplicably did not show, which left Tony anxious and puzzled. After numerous unsuccessful attempts to reach him, Tony contacted the diocese, who confirmed that Rubio was on his way. It wasn't until 2 days later that Rubio arrived, apologizing profusely for his delay without giving a solid reason. This mysterious event had sown a seed of doubt in Tony's mind, leading him to the reluctant decision to install cameras. The footage now appeared to confirm his suspicions, marking a pivotal moment in how he perceived trust and security within his beloved community. This was the first time Tony had resorted to such levels of surveillance, a move that was practically unheard of in this tight-knit, trusting environment. Yet, there he was, confronted with a reality that questioned everything he believed about the place he loved and had dedicated his life to serving. He explained that his flight had been unexpectedly delayed, forcing him to stay overnight at a hotel. Unfortunately, he overslept the following morning and was delayed further when he finally hit the road. Severe traffic congestion forced him to spend an additional night at a motel. When he eventually met Tony, the young priest looked visibly worn out from the grueling travel. Tony, noticing his exhaustion, decided against asking more questions. Helen, on the other hand, arrived as planned. A quiet person, She generally kept to herself unless needed. Despite her reserved demeanor, she was extremely helpful in the church, significantly easing Tony's workload along with Rubio. Before long, however, whispers began to spread about Helen within the church community. People noticed her frequent appearances near Rubio, particularly during masses where she seemed particularly attentive to the young priest. Their close collaboration led to rumors of a secret relationship. The gossip escalated one morning when a churchgoer claimed to have seen Helen sneaking into Rubio's room. The congregation was abuzz, as members rushed to catch them in the act. However, Rubio was not in his room at the time. Helen explained that she was just there to retrieve an item. In response, Father Tony suggested that Helen and Rubio should spend less time together. While he trusted them and did not believe they would engage in any inappropriate behavior that could disgrace the church, he urged them to act in a way that would restore the congregation's trust. Both agreed to follow his guidance and were excused. Unfortunately, the situation worsened. It wasn't only the rumored affair that troubled the church. That same morning, the sacristy was burglarized for the first time, with items worth thousands of dollars stolen. This unprecedented theft left many church members at a loss on how to react. Tony immediately notified the police, but they were unable to identify the culprit. Following this, the church suffered multiple break-ins, usually on Sunday nights when the collection money was held until the banks reopened on Monday. Despite the continual burglaries and the police's apparent inability to help effectively, Tony endeavored to find a way to protect the church and its assets. Initially, Tony had taken measures to secure the church's funds by keeping them at the home of a trusted member, confident that this person would not be compromised. Swayed by the allure of the funds, a member had stored the cash at his residence. Tragically, on that same evening, burglars broke into the home. During the confrontation with the intruder, the member was severely assaulted. The violent episode left him, his wife, and their children deeply traumatized, bearing profound emotional wounds. Overcome with remorse about the event, Tony pledged to prevent a recurrence of such an ordeal. However, he struggled to devise a strategy to apprehend the thief who seemed to evade every plan Tony formulated. Adding to the unease was Tony's growing suspicion that the thefts might be orchestrated by someone within his close network of friends. Concurrently, the church was embroiled in internal conflict. Gossip about a possible inappropriate relationship between Helen and Rubio was spreading, despite Helen's reassurances to Tony. The frequent sightings of Helen and Rubio together only amplified the rumors and mistrust within the congregation. Burdened by these issues, Tony decided to concentrate on capturing the thief. In a covert operation, he bought CCTV cameras and employed a technician from another town to install them discreetly around the church. He timed the installation for a period when he would be alone. Rubio was occupied with community work, and Helen was volunteering at the hospital. Tony took great care to conceal the cameras, wary that their discovery might alert the thief. He kept the surveillance system confidential, disclosing it to no one until it was absolutely necessary. On a Sunday, the church was abuzz with anticipation as it prepared to secure a substantial new donation of over $100,000. The funds were desperately needed to replace stolen musical instruments and provide aid to the orphanage. The congregation, trusting in Tony's vigilance, urged him to keep the funds in his room while he slept, believing this would offer the best security. Despite his doubts, Tony consented, hoping that his new security measures would safeguard the assets and help mend the fractured trust within their troubled church community. The congregation was confident that if a thief attempted to intrude, Tony would certainly see them. However, Tony had a different strategy in mind. He aimed to capture the thief on camera, a plan that he knew would be ineffective if the money was kept in his room. Despite the daunting challenges ahead, he carefully placed the money in the sacristy, believing that this approach would soon bring the issue to a resolution. As anticipated, a thief did enter and take the money. From his office, Tony watched the surveillance footage, his heart sinking as he witnessed Rubio, a young priest, cautiously enter the sacristy. Rubio climbed to the hidden money, took it swiftly, and made his escape. Tony was astounded and felt a deep sense of betrayal. Never had he imagined that one of his own priests would deceive him so profoundly. The video revealed the stark reality that someone Tony trusted implicitly had stolen from the church. This act of treachery cut deeply, not only because of the monetary loss, but also because it struck at the core of the trust that was vital to their community. Tony knew that Rubio must face the consequences of his actions. This betrayal could not go unpunished, and the integrity of the church had to be restored. Determined to address the situation with both justice and compassion, Tony prepared to confront Rubio. The path ahead was fraught with emotional and spiritual challenges, but Tony was resolute. He understood that confronting this betrayal head-on was the only way to heal the wounds within their community and ensure that such a breach of trust would never happen again. Just as Tony prepared to leave his office, he paused as the video continued. Helen then appeared on screen, deepening Tony's despair as he realized she was complicit from the start. Rage filled him as he watched her enter the sacristy. Rubio, spotting her first, quickly concealed himself behind the door. As Helen entered, Rubio ambushed her from behind, resulting in a tumultuous scuffle that left the sacristy in disarray. Ultimately, Rubio knocked Helen unconscious and hid her in a closet. Concerned that Helen might still be in the closet, Tony hurried back to the sacristy as if his life depended on it. He alerted other church members to the danger, and they quickly opened the closet to find Helen, barely conscious with several injuries. They immediately called the police and an ambulance. While waiting for them, Tony led the team to Rubio's room, where they found him desperately packing his clothes, evidently planning to escape. They seized his bag and were shocked to discover it filled with a large sum of money. Rubio had been the thief all along, selling stolen items and accumulating cash for unknown reasons. The entire community was stunned, struggling to accept that their trusted priest could be so deceitful and cruel. The police took charge, addressing the severe betrayal and ensuring justice was upheld. As the situation unfolded, law enforcement swiftly intervened, arresting the man while Helen was rushed to the hospital for urgent medical care. The police committed to a thorough investigation of the case, considering the new evidence that had come to light, leading to a more in-depth probe. The inquiry into the person known as Father Rubio took a shocking turn when it was discovered that the individual claiming to be Father Rubio was actually an imposter. This fraudster, truly named Jack, had usurped the identity of the legitimate priest. It emerged that Jack was a fugitive who had previously been imprisoned for drug-related crimes. After breaking out of jail, he fortuitously stumbled upon the real Father Rubio's identification following a tragic event. The revelation sent shockwaves through the community, deepening the sense of betrayal and disbelief. The real Father Rubio, a man known for his kindness and integrity, had his identity stolen by a criminal with a dark past. Jack's deceit was a carefully constructed facade, fooling everyone in the congregation and exploiting their trust for his gain. As the police delved deeper into Jack's history, they uncovered a web of lies and criminal activities that spanned years. Jack had used his assumed identity to infiltrate the church, leveraging his position to commit further crimes under the guise of a trusted spiritual leader. The gravity of his actions extended beyond the theft, shaking the very foundation of the community's faith and trust. In the wake of this revelation, the church community faced the arduous task of rebuilding their trust and healing the wounds inflicted by Jack's deception. The genuine Father Rubio's memory had to be honored, and the community had to come together to restore the integrity of their spiritual home. Tony and the other church leaders worked tirelessly to provide support and reassurance to their congregants, ensuring that the values of faith, trust, and justice prevailed. On the day he was scheduled to first appear at the church, the real Father Rubio perished in a car crash. His car had swerved off the road and struck a tree, causing his immediate death. Jack, having just broken out of prison, arrived at the scene of the accident. Recognizing a chance to avoid capture and begin anew, Jack adopted the identity of the dead priest by taking his ID and priestly attire from the back seat of the car. Coincidentally, Jack slightly resembled Father Rubio, which helped him in his fraudulent scheme. From his initial day at the church, he crafted a network of lies. The ruse was particularly successful since none of the churchgoers, including Tony, had previously encountered or seen Father Rubio, leaving them without any basis to judge his looks or mannerisms. During rigorous police questioning, Jack finally broke down. He admitted that his reason for continuing to steal money was to finance a revival of his drug operations. Lacking the necessary funds, he saw the church as a resource to accumulate the capital required. He chose not to divert church funds directly to avoid drawing suspicion. Instead, he found that breaking in was the most viable strategy to amass the nearly $400,000 needed to restart his illegal endeavors. Tony was profoundly disturbed by these disclosures. He was horrified that he had inadvertently allowed such a person to enter the church and misuse the congregation's trust. The betrayal was deeply painful, especially as the church and Helen had suffered due to his blind faith. Tony regretted not verifying Rubio's identity with the diocese sooner, which might have averted the fraud. The following day, Helen awoke in the hospital, ushering in a new phase of this intricate tale. A few hours after she was cleared to provide her statement, Helen revealed the reasons for her secretive actions and her suspicions about Rubio. 8 years earlier, Helen and Rubio had previously engaged in a significant overseas mission with the Cardinal, a brief yet transformative experience for Helena, as it allowed her the exceptional chance to collaborate closely with the Cardinal, an experience that profoundly impacted her. Upon discovering that she and Rubio would be assigned to the same church, Helena was initially thrilled about the reunion with her former colleague and friend. However, her excitement soon turned to bewilderment when she realized that Rubio did not recognize her, nor remember their joint mission with the Cardinal. This glaring oversight aroused her suspicions. As Helena scrutinized him further, she noticed unsettling changes. His voice was different, his appearance had markedly changed, and his behavior was unlike what she remembered. Although time had passed since their last meeting, these changes made her cautious about jumping to conclusions too quickly. She was wary of the implications of wrongly accusing an innocent person, which restrained her from expressing her suspicions without solid evidence. Nonetheless, Helena was driven to monitor Rubio closely, persuaded that he was engaged in dubious activities. Her instinct suggested that he might be behind recent thefts at the church. On the night she intended to catch him red-handed, the encounter escalated violently, resulting in Rubio assaulting her and her subsequent hospitalization. Upon learning about Helen's ordeal, Tony felt regret for ever questioning her honesty. Relieved that the suspicions of Helen's involvement in the thefts were unfounded, he committed to helping the police ensure that the real thief, Jack, faced a harsh penalty. The stolen funds were retrieved and swiftly returned to the church, and by the weekend, all missing items had been replaced, with any extra funds being donated to a local orphanage. Helen fully recovered and resumed her responsibilities at the church. Meanwhile, Jack was sent back to prison, facing a longer sentence with hard labor. The church community, though rattled by the events, found solace in having weathered the storm. They conducted a burial ceremony for the real Father Rubio, promising never to forget him. Ultimately, everyone agreed that moving forward was the best course of action. Who could have predicted such a turn of events? Was Rubio really an impersonator? What steps would you have taken if you were in Father Tony's shoes? You can share it with everyone in the comment area, and then we will bring you another touching story. Let's continue.
It was a beautiful and sunny day, perfect for a wedding where everyone felt jubilant and looked forward to a marvelous celebration. Yet, the ceremony took a surprising twist when the priest intensely observed the bride and abruptly stopped the proceedings, shocking everyone there. Friends and family had gathered to witness the union of Donald and Media as the organist played the wedding march. Donald advanced confidently towards the front, his eyes on the crucifix decorating the altar. Feeling a mix of nerves and hope, he silently wished for the day to proceed without any hitches. Despite his optimism, he couldn't shake off the fear of possibly losing Media to another, as her stunning allure and charm made him feel incredibly fortunate to be with her. Priest Francis, clad in ornate ceremonial robes and exuding a serene spirituality, descended from the altar with a holy sacrament in hand. With his glasses resting at the tip of his nose, he scanned the congregation, placed the sacrament on a table, and approached Donald, who greeted him with a respectful nod. They exchanged pleasantries in Spanish, a language Donald barely knew due to his sporadic church visits. Preparing for the wedding, he had attended marriage counseling sessions. As the melody changed, Donald turned to see Medea, his beloved, at the entrance in a stunning white wedding dress. As she proceeded down the aisle, the congregation was mesmerized by her beauty. She was the most radiant bride they had ever seen. Medea walked alone. She had informed Donald that she had lost her family in an accident and had no relatives left. Despite this, Donald admired her resilience and how she had developed into a respectable and lively young woman on her own. When Medea reached the altar, her elegant stride, composed nature, and heavenly smile captivated all present. Donald recalled their first encounter at a charity event a friend had organized. He noticed her alone, enjoying a cappuccino, dressed in a white gown that accentuated her ethereal glow. Donald observed her politely declining conversation with wealthy and influential suitors as if they were of no importance. Although he was intrigued by her, witnessing her dismiss such sought-after individuals initially discouraged him. He was profoundly surprised when she eventually accepted his invitation to dance. She initiated contact with him and asked for a drink. At first, he thought he was in a dream, but he soon realized it was indeed happening. They engaged in conversation and exchanged contact information. From that moment on, he constantly dreamed of her. Her presence overwhelmed his thoughts, making him question his sanity until he recognized that it was love, a love that blossomed quickly and deeply. Initially, Donald felt nervous, but he quickly became comfortable with these intense emotions, especially since Mia returned his feelings with equal fervor. She pledged to spend her lifetime with him, and now she was fulfilling that promise. At the wedding, the priest gazed at the couple with a smile, always happy to see young people get married. He spoke directly to them, delivering a heartfelt sermon that urged them to love and honor each other in all circumstances, enriching their life together. He then asked if they were ready to proceed with their vows, to which they both eagerly nodded. As they walked to the altar, the priest asked Donald to lift his bride's veil. As he did, the priest screamed in shock, dropped the microphone, and collapsed. Altar boys quickly came to his aid and helped him into a chair. Looking intently at Donald and then at Mia, the priest tried to stand but fell once more. An altar boy quickly brought him a glass of water, which he drank rapidly before leaning back and catching his breath. Confused, Donald thought Father Francis might be ill, but the priest's strange looks, especially towards Mia, suggested something else. After regaining some composure, the priest stared at Mia and asked if they had met before. Mia, surprised, denied any previous meeting. However, the priest insisted she was lying and adamantly stated they had met, though he could not recall where. Concerned, Donald intervened, explaining that Mia had only recently arrived in town, making a prior meeting unlikely. Now visibly upset, the priest declared he would no longer officiate the wedding. The congregation was shocked, their eyes fixed on the couple, sensing a significant reason for the priest's sudden refusal to continue. During the wedding, Donald thought of Father Francis as a misguided old man. It was clear the old man was mistaken, as he had only met Mia during their premarital counseling sessions. "No, I know what I'm talking about. I've seen her before," the priest insisted. Father Francis exclaimed, causing alarm among the parishioners. No one had ever seen the priest so angered. Just when everyone thought the situation couldn't deteriorate further, Father Francis, pointing at Medea's right shoulder, emphatically claimed she had a sinister mark there. At this, Donald couldn't help but burst into laughter, more convinced than ever that Father Francis was mistaken. He was certain that Medea had no tattoos at all. Father Francis maintained that the mark was not merely a tattoo but a symbol connected to a dark, sacred dimension. This claim was the breaking point for Donald. He turned to Medea, who was visibly angry, and apologized. Losing her temper, Medea threatened the priest with legal action for harassment. The priest stated he could only proceed with the wedding if Medea proved her shoulder was mark-free. He then called upon 3 women to escort her to a private room to verify this. Despite Donald's protests, signaled by his father to stay calm, the women tried to lead Medea away. Following a tense exchange, Medea reluctantly agreed to accompany them. Once they were out of earshot, a shocking transformation occurred. Medea raised her hands, and her eyes ominously changed color. The women, struck by Medea's intense gaze and overwhelming aura, found themselves struggling for breath. After intimidating the women, Medea instructed them to return and reveal the priest's supposed deception. They complied, still shaken by the experience, feeling as though acid had been poured on them. Once they had regained their composure, Medea, with a poised and confident air, followed them back to the congregation. The church members, witnessing her assertive return, braced themselves for what might follow. As everyone gathered at the altar, the woman calmly announced that her shoulder bore no mark. A tense silence fell over the room until Donald erupted in anger, shouting at the priest and accusing him of creating unnecessary drama instead of performing the wedding ceremony. He was worried about the embarrassment this might cause his guests and the media. After apologizing to her profusely, he even threatened to sue the church. Ignoring the uproar, the priest began to chant softly, his voice a steady and calm presence amidst the chaos. Turning to Maria, their gazes met briefly. The priest accused the media of enchanting the women to serve her purposes, an accusation Donald found utterly ridiculous. He did not believe in the supernatural and saw the priest's actions as a mere spectacle designed to undermine his marriage. Determined not to be humiliated again, Donald grabbed his wife's hand and prepared to leave the church. As he readied himself to depart, gripping his wife's hand tightly, his father approached him. He murmured comforting words, attempting to calm Donald's wrath. He reminded his son that throughout the many years he had known Father Francis, the man had never been known to lie or deceive anyone. His words carried the weight of experience and trust, urging Donald to reconsider his rash judgment. Donald, still seething but somewhat pacified by his father's intervention, cast a lingering glance at the priest. The congregation watched with bated breath, unsure of what would happen next. The tension in the room was palpable, each second stretching into an eternity as Donald wrestled with his conflicting emotions. Meanwhile, the priest continued his soft chanting, his voice a soothing balm against the storm of emotions raging within Donald. The air seemed to thicken with an almost tangible energy, as if the very walls of the church were holding their breath in anticipation. Donald's wife, though outwardly calm, had a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes. Whether it was fear, guilt, or something more sinister, Donald could not tell. His father's words echoed in his mind, causing him to pause and reflect, however briefly, on the events unfolding around him. The priest's unwavering faith and the quiet strength of his father's conviction began to chip away at Donald's certainty. As the chanting grew louder, the atmosphere in the church shifted, becoming charged with a sense of impending revelation. The congregation, once tense and fearful, started to feel a glimmer of hope. In that charged moment, Donald stood at a crossroads. The decision he made would not only determine the course of his life but also the fate of his soul. The choice between believing in the unseen and trusting in the tangible was a struggle that raged within him, pulling him in two opposing directions. Father Francis was esteemed as a spiritual guide and a powerful exorcist. Skilled in the art of exorcism and spiritual liberation, he had journeyed to almost every continent to help individuals plagued by malevolent entities. He had the unique ability to perceive and discern demonic entities within the spiritual realms. Nearing retirement, he opted to settle in a quiet Scottish community to pursue his divine calling. The local residents and those in the neighboring towns held Father Francis in high regard for his spiritual aptitude and trusted his judgments. Thus, when he leveled an accusation against Medea, it was believed to contain some element of truth. Donald found himself torn between his father's counsel and his wife Medea, who persistently claimed that the elderly priest and his followers were mistaken. Suddenly, the priest exclaimed and pointed at Medea, "I remember you." All eyes turned towards him. Father Francis recalled presiding over a wedding in London a decade ago where Medea was the bride. Before blessing the marriage, he noticed a mark on Medea's shoulder, which he initially overlooked. Disturbing visions haunted him throughout the ceremony. Despite his reservations about Medea, he could not stop the wedding, captivated by her charm and demeanor. On the night of the wedding, Medea killed her husband and escaped. Ever since, Father Francis had been troubled by that day and resolved to always trust his instincts. This revelation shocked everyone present, and Donald was deeply disturbed. As the crowd watched in disbelief, clasping their hands, the priest fervently began his prayers, casting out demons as he sweated profusely and trembled with fear. Despite the terror, he persisted in his prayers. Suddenly, a horrifying scene unfolded. Medea started barking like a dog, then meowing like a cat, and her body unnervingly shifted into a scene straight out of a horror film. The sounds of her bones crunching as she transformed made Donald sick, and her once beautiful face was now hideously covered with warts and snorts. The priest escalated his prayers, invoking the power of the crucifixion, while Medea, now transformed and menacing, growled at him. Unyielding, the priest's lips quivered as he continued his invocation. As she persisted in her invocation and sprinkled holy water, Medea stretched out her arm, commanding the natural forces to heed her call. She uttered incantations, invoking ancient powers. A fierce gust of wind overturned the crucifix, slammed doors shut, and scattered the altar's belongings, creating turmoil. The guests, who had gathered for a wedding, stared in terror as the venue transformed into a battlefield. Some looked on in fear, while others offered prayers for the priest's triumph, aware of his famed exorcism skills across the continent, though experiencing it in person was profoundly unsettling. At that instant, Medea extended her hand towards the priest, who choked as an unseen force hoisted him into the air. Clutching his crucifix, he prayed vehemently. Medea taunted him, swearing allegiance to Lucifer and rendering the priest powerless. Yet, Father Francis, seasoned in the art of exorcism, recognized that Lucifer represented light and that she was using his fears and past sins against him. With closed eyes, he sought heavenly safeguard, aimed his crucifix at her, and demanded her capitulation. Feeling the priest's defiance, Medea raised her hand again but was countered by a strong wind. The priest, steadfast in his authority, continued to call upon sacred fire against her. Soon, she felt as though she was ablaze. The priest encouraged the assembly to pray for their triumph, and as they united in prayer, a resonant voice knocked Medea to the ground, leaving her debilitated. Her appearance gradually returned to normal, and she called out to Donald for assistance. The priest sternly warned Donald not to heed her cries. As she implored, "Donald, help me," he saw his wife lying prone and vulnerable, but he managed to hold back. The priest cautioned Donald that the woman before him was not who she seemed. With determined steps, the priest approached her, sprinkling holy water and demanding loudly that she reveal her true identity. She confessed, "My real name is Medusa, not Medea. I come from a marine clan, a secretive order of darkness from the spirit realm. Our mission is to form bonds not just with any men, but with those possessing significant vision and influence. We marry these men and claim their lives on our wedding night. I have lived for 140 years and have been with 665 men." The congregation was taken aback by this shocking revelation, while the priest remained composed, having dealt with similar occurrences in the past. As he prepared to weaken her resolve for a final exorcism, Medusa lunged at him with a fierce roar, knocking Francis to the floor. Rising swiftly to her feet, she pulled a blade from her pocket. However, Francis quickly immobilized her soul, leaving her unable to move. Calling upon the power of the New Testament, the priest invoked its strength against Medusa, significantly weakening her. In a desperate attempt, she charged at the congregation, inciting fear and chaos as people fled in all directions within the church. The air was thick with panic, but the priest stood firm. Facing him once more, Medusa defiantly proclaimed, "I will indeed marry Donald and enforce my will." With those words, she leaped out of a window and vanished into the dark expanse of the forest. The entire episode left the congregation in shock, the atmosphere heavy with a mix of fear and disbelief. The priest's steadfastness and unwavering faith had been the bulwark against the malevolent force. Donald, now fully grasping the danger and deception that had enveloped his life, felt a mix of relief and sorrow. The woman he once loved had been a sinister entity with a dark purpose. Reflecting on the events, Donald realized the depth of his vulnerability and the critical role the priest had played in saving his life. This profound experience led him to a path of devout service. He committed himself to the holy sanctuary, becoming an altar server and taking on the responsibility of conducting Mass daily. Through these intense trials, Donald's belief in God was solidified, and he dedicated himself to spreading his word for the rest of his life. Donald was astounded by the chaotic conclusion of his wedding. Approaching the priest, he knelt down, apologizing for his previous doubts and thanking the priest for his intervention. Sitting down exhaustedly, the priest noted that if this confrontation had occurred a decade earlier, Donald would not be facing such danger. He then advised Donald that his life was at risk and recommended he stay within the safety of the parish, where Medusa and her followers could not reach him, as she would persist in her attempts to end his life. As the guests and church members departed, the altar boys began the meticulous task of cleaning up the sanctuary. Donald was escorted back to his modest apartment, a simple room containing just a bed. Overwhelmed by the day's unsettling events, he closed the window before collapsing onto the bed. However, a sudden gust of wind mysteriously reopened it. Finding this peculiar, Donald attempted to secure the window again, but as he did so, he was startled by a menacing noise. The window flew open with force, and to his horror, Medusa's face appeared, her teeth bared threateningly. Donald screamed and stumbled to the floor, frantically trying to open the door, which seemed jammed. As Medusa slowly entered the room, now clad in an eerie yet beautiful wedding gown, Donald, paralyzed with shock, cried out, "Jesus!" and pulled at the door with all his strength. This time, the door burst open, as if propelled by some unseen force. Screaming, Donald dashed towards the main church, seeking refuge and guidance from the priest, who was deeply absorbed in prayer. The church was in chaos. Pews were toppled over, and shards of wood littered the floor. The media had transformed the serene holy place into a scene of havoc. Amidst this turmoil, the priest and Donald began to pray together, an unusual act for Donald, who hadn't prayed in years. As they sustained their prayers throughout the night, it seemed as though an external, malevolent force was attempting to tear them apart. Holding Donald's hand firmly, the priest continued to pray with unwavering determination. Their faith seemed to seal the church doors, keeping the intrusive media at bay. The media pounded on the glass windows, shouting Donald's name, but the priest encouraged him to stay focused and maintain their prayer. Throughout the night, they remained vigilant, while the media outside threatened to destroy the church and expose the priest's secrets. Donald confronted the priest about his silence regarding these threats, to which the priest calmly replied that they were merely distraction tactics. If the media succeeded, it would manipulate their fears and weaken their resolve. The priest advised Donald to reach out to his family for support while he contacted spiritually resilient members of the congregation. They needed to prepare for a rigorous exorcism to banish the media back to her domain without making any physical contact. They endured until dawn, and when the media finally breached the church, it paradoxically made their task more straightforward. The priest's prayers created a protective shield around them that the media could not penetrate. As more church members arrived, they joined in another intense session of prayer. Wielding a crucifix, the priest confronted the media, summoning her to face divine judgment. The malevolent force could not overcome the church's collective resistance. Her vitality slowly diminished until she was ultimately defeated. Everyone sighed in relief, but Donald was overcome with tears, struggling to accept that the woman he loved had intended to harm him. He had never suspected that his charming fiancée was a witch. The priest declared that she must be buried immediately due to the malevolent forces within her. With tears streaming down his face, Donald watched as her body was buried in the forest, confronting the profound fragility of his own existence. Had it not been for the priest's intervention, he would have perished. This harrowing experience transformed Donald. He devoted himself to serving in the holy sanctuary, becoming an altar server and conducting Mass daily. Through these trials, he solidified his belief in God and committed to spreading his word for the rest of his life. That's today's story. After listening to the above two stories, what are your thoughts on them? Please feel free to share your opinions in the comment area. Thank you for tuning in. If you like them, please subscribe and like them. See you next time.